What if a crucial partnership, one vital for fighting global terrorism, was always sort of teetering on the edge because of a flashpoint dispute, forcing this really delicate balancing act between two nuclear powers?
And what if trying to work with one partner actually ended up, maybe inadvertently, strengthening the other one's position in that same long-running conflict?
It's a complex picture. Today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that, the intricate web of U.S. strategic relations with two really pivotal South Asian nations, Pakistan and India.
We'll explore their very different motivations, their contributions to counterterrorism efforts globally, and importantly, how that intractable dispute over Kashmir just continuously complicates everything.
Yeah, everything. Our insights today come from a detailed 2004 report by C. Christine Fair. It's titled The Counterterror Coalitions, Cooperation with Pakistan and India, prepared for the U.S. Air Force and published by RAND Corporation.
And our mission, for you listening, is to help you understand how the U.S. is trying to navigate this diplomatic minefield, why India and Pakistan have this history of being both allies and adversaries.
And specifically, what role Kashmir plays in shaping regional security and, well, those broader counterterrorism goals. We'll unpack some specific details, maybe some surprising facts from the report that really shed light on why managing these relationships is just such a constant high-stakes challenge for Washington. Okay, let's get into it.
So to really grasp Pakistan's position here, we kind of need to step back and look at its history with the U.S.
Right.
The security relationship, it properly kicked off with the Mutual Defense Assistance Agreement back in 1954. And then by late 55, Pakistan had joined SEATO, that's the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and CENTO, the Central Treaty Organization.
Key Cold War alliances.
Exactly, both aimed at containing Soviet expansion. But what's really striking, even back then, is the difference in motivations. The U.S., its eyes were firmly on the Soviets.
Containing communism.
Right. Whereas Pakistan, its main goal was countering India's growing influence. So this tension, this underlying difference, it was there right from the very beginning, even if it was sort of downplayed initially.
And that relationship, it really seemed to solidify during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, 79 to 89. But then, like the report details, things took a pretty dramatic turn, didn't they?
They certainly did. The U.S. Congress passed the Pressler Amendment. This was because of suspicions about Pakistan's nuclear program.
Right.
And it led to aid being cut in 1990 when Pakistan was seen as having crossed key nuclear thresholds.
And the report suggests this wasn't just about the money, was it? It kind of deepened this sense of abandonment in Pakistan, pushed them further towards relying on their own nuclear program, maybe? Created a real rift.
Oh, absolutely. A long-term strategic rift. And that rift just kept deepening through the 90s. You had the Glenn Symington sanctions after their 98 nuclear tests. Those penalized proliferation. Then Section 508 sanctions after General Musharraf's coup in 99, typically tied to coups.
Right.
Plus, entity-specific sanctions under the Missile Technology Control Regime, MTCR, blocking missile tech transfers.
So cooperation just sort of dried up after 1990.
Pretty much minimal. The report mentions the suspension of the IMET program, that's International Military Education and Training, and that meant less mutual understanding between, say, lower-level officers, just less connection.
So it raises a big question then. How did President Clinton's approach, that sort of India-first policy, remember the 5-day visit to India versus just 5 hours in Pakistan in 2000, and wasn't there that public refusal to shake Musharraf's hand? How did that really land in Pakistan? How did it affect their perspective, that feeling of being left behind?
It's a really powerful point, that deep-seated sense of abandonment. And the report suggests, like you said, it wasn't just hurt feelings. It actively reshaped their foreign policy.
Their priorities shifted.
Definitely. You see this pervasive anti-American sentiment bubbling up in Pakistan. The report links it to perceived U.S. support for Israel, that feeling of being ditched after the Soviets left Afghanistan, the Pressler Amendment itself, and the U.S. stance on the Kargil conflict in 99, which was definitely not supportive of Pakistan's actions.
And yet, despite all that distrust, all that history, President Musharraf makes this huge decision on September 13, 2001, to join the U.S.-led counterterrorism coalition.
His reasons, as the report lays them out, were incredibly complex. It wasn't just one thing.
Right.
Pakistan, they arguably sought an excuse to cut ties with the Taliban, which was becoming a liability. They needed to tackle their own serious internal security problems, protect their strategic assets, think nuclear weapons.
Right.
maybe even resolve the Kashmir issue on their terms, and critically preempt a U.S. drift towards India, and perhaps most importantly, avoid becoming a direct target of the war on terror themselves.
That's a really key point, avoiding becoming the target.
Yeah.
And the U.S. response, they offered immediate relief from some sanctions, didn't they? Like Glenn Symington and Section 508, specifically to make the partnership possible.
Yes, a quid pro quo.
Yeah.
And Pakistan, for its part, initially seemed to expect, well, maybe an equitable resolution on Kashmir, some recognition of its stake in that dispute in return for throwing its support behind the U.S.
But their views on the actual threats were miles apart, weren't they? The U.S. focus was squarely on Iraq, Iran, al-Qaeda globally.
While Pakistan's primary threats looked very different, they were worried about the new government in Afghanistan, India's saber-rattling as they saw it, the unresolved Kashmir issue, and crucially, domestic sectarian militant groups, Iran, not really seen as a threat from their perspective.
Interesting.
And Pakistan increasingly saw the Taliban not as this strategic asset anymore, but more as a declining one, especially as these sectarian militants started using Afghanistan as a refuge. And the Taliban's alliance with al-Qaeda was really starting to jeopardize Pakistan's own foreign policy goals.
Right, and this connects to a bigger picture the report paints. Pakistan's internal security problems, the militancy, the drug and weapons trafficking, sectarian violence, the whole madrasa issue, these didn't just spring up with the Taliban.
No, not at all. The roots go way back. The report traces them to the fallout from the Soviet-Afghan War, the Iranian Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War. These events really fostered this culture of sectarian violence and militancy inside Pakistan.
And the report points out how Pakistan defines terrorism in a very specific way, which is crucial to understand. They seem to make distinctions.
They do. They differentiate between, say, foreign militants who are theoretically easier to deal with. Then there are the sectarian groups, or those focused on attacking the Pakistani state itself. There's a strong incentive for the government to counter those.
And then the third category.
And then the Kashmir-focused groups, often labeled freedom fighters. The report suggests these are sometimes viewed internally as a kind of strategic reserve for the proxy war against India.
A proxy war that, as the report highlights, has fueled sectarianism within Pakistan itself and had huge opportunity costs for the country's development. Some Pakistani critics were even calling it a disastrous failure back then.
And a really interesting, almost paradoxical development mentioned is the emergence of these morphed coalitions, groups like Lashkar-e-Umar, where different militant factions started collaborating, blurring the lines between them.
Which makes it much harder for Pakistan to, say, selectively target groups if they wanted to, right?
Yeah.
The enemies aren't neatly compartmentalized anymore.
Exactly. It complicates any strategy of picking and choosing who to go after.
So let's shift to Pakistan's actual contributions then.
All right.
Operation Enduring Freedom, the broader war on terrorism. The report details a massive, absolutely massive logistical and operational effort, especially early on.
It really was significant. Extensive military and intelligence support. You had the Army committing over 35,000 troops just for internal security and operations support, including special forces battalions.
Wow.
The Air Force, 7,000 troops, use of radars, and crucially allowing coalition forces to use 2/3 of Pakistani airspace. That facilitated over 28,000 sorties just between October 2001 and March 2002.
28,000. That's incredible. And they provide bases, too.
Key intermediate staging bases, places like Jacobabad, Pazni, Dalban, Jem Valley, critical hubs. They even supplied, initially without asking for repayment, 100,000 gallons of fuel daily for coalition aircraft.
100,000 gallons daily.
Yeah.
Without repayment initially.
That's what the report says. Plus, they dedicated another 35,000 troops specifically for force protection at coalition bases. And the report notes this was successful. No major terrorist incidents involving U.S. military forces on those bases.
That's a significant point. And naval support.
Yes, supported naval and marine ops, enabling Task Force 58 activities described as potentially the largest USMC amphibious operation since Korea. They also deployed over 80 battalions to try and seal that incredibly rugged western border with Afghanistan.
Despite the terrain, despite tribal sympathies.
Exactly, and this led to the capture of around 420 high-value Taliban and al-Qaeda fugitives, according to the report.
Which brings us to intelligence. The report stresses the critical role of Pakistani intelligence, especially human intelligence.
Absolutely vital. Given their deep historical ties to Afghanistan, their past relationship with the Taliban, they had access and insights the U.S. simply didn't.
But the report also kind of hints at the complexity there, right?
Hmm.
Relying on a partner whose strengths were partly derived from connections that also complicated broader counterterrorism aims, a constant balancing act.
Precisely. It's that inherent tension again.
Okay, beyond military and intel, what about diplomacy? Law enforcement.
Diplomatically, the big one was the dramatic reversal of their decades-old policy towards Afghanistan. That was huge. They also ratified or acceded to 9 out of 12 UN anti-terrorism conventions.
And on the law enforcement side.
They ordered banks to freeze assets of suspected terrorist groups. Formed a working group on money laundering, though, as the report notes. The pervasive informal hawala money transfer system makes that really challenging.
The Hawala network, yeah, hard to track.
Very. Pakistan also signed extradition treaties with 27 countries. And importantly, they rendered high-profile individuals like Abu Zubaydah and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to the U.S., even without a formal extradition treaty in place.
So they handed them over.
Effectively, yes.
Now, while these actions sound significant, the report does inject some caution, doesn't it, about the effectiveness?
It does. It notes that many banned groups simply changed their names, or there were reports they were tipped off before crackdowns. The Hawala network, corruption, these definitely complicated financial tracking.
But the report also found some belief on the ground that these measures did hinder some groups.
Yes, the field work suggested a widespread view that it did make it harder for some groups to raise funds and operate, even with the loopholes.
And they had anti-terrorism laws.
They passed the Anti-Terrorism Act back in '97, amended it in 2001, made abetting terrorism punishable. But again, the report points to selective use. For instance, a known sectarian militant leader was apparently allowed to run for election while still in jail.
Selective enforcement? What about weapons?
There were weapon bans, recovery campaigns. One yielded 87,000 surrendered weapons voluntarily. But the report suggests these had pretty limited impact given the pervasive gun culture.
Right, which leads to the madrasa reforms Musharraf talked about. How effective were those really, given past failures and concessions to conservative elements? Did they just strengthen radicals, as some observers claimed?
That's the big question the report raises. It points to the spectacular failure of previous attempts and suggests continued concessions really undermine the reform efforts.
Okay, so lots of complexities and limitations. But Pakistan does have strengths, right? The report highlights some.
Definitely. Strategic geography is undeniable. That crossroads of South, Southwest, and Central Asia, that's huge.
Location, location, location.
Absolutely. And the report also points to what it calls a surprisingly moderate populace, citing polls showing strong support for madrasa reform and banning militant groups. Plus, of course, a professional, disciplined army.
But the limitations are significant, too. The report is quite blunt about some of them.
Very blunt. Pakistan's Kashmir policy is described as being on a direct collision course with Washington, actively undermining U.S. goals of regional stability and degrading terrorist capabilities.
So, working at cross purposes.
Essentially, there was deep skepticism, noted in the report, about Musharraf's willingness to permanently end infiltration into Kashmir without getting concessions from India first.
And other limitations. Financial weakness. Domestic sentiment.
Yes, fiscal weakness means military partnership often requires significant financial help from the U.S. Pervasive lack of resources hinders things. Domestic anti-American sentiment limits what the U.S. can do on the ground, things like hot pursuit operations across the border, or even just the visible presence of U.S. troops at bases.
And basic law enforcement capacity.
Deep deficiencies there, too, like a lack of forensics labs, which the report notes the U.S. was trying to help address.
But then there's the really big one. The nuclear proliferation concerns.
Yeah, this is where it gets really serious, according to the report. Serious allegations of direct Pakistani support, specifically involving AQ Khan's network, for nuclear programs in Iran, North Korea, possibly Saudi Arabia. Evidence cited includes transfers of gas centrifuge technology to North Korea in exchange for missiles.
That raises fundamental questions about Pakistan's credibility as a responsible nuclear weapons state, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's a profound concern woven through the analysis.
So given this whole complex picture, the cooperation, the limitations, the distrust, the dependencies, what does Pakistan actually want from the United States, according to this 2004 report?
Well, first off, a more stable relationship, one that isn't episodic, as they put it, not just turning on and off based on crises.
Consistency.
Yes, and considerable financial and economic help. Debt relief, a joint economic forum, OPEC loans to encourage U.S. investment.
Market access too.
Expanded access to U.S. markets, especially for things like apparel exports. That was a big one.
What about security assistance, internal and military?
Help fortifying internal security things like better criminal investigation units, airport databases, and expanded military-to-military ties. They wanted F-16s, P-3 Orion surveillance planes, spare parts, and crucially, the resumption of that IMET training program.
Bringing the officers back together.
Exactly. Rebuilding those personal connections. And finally, recognition of what they see as their regional equities.
Which means?
An equitable resolution of the Kashmir issue from their perspective, an acknowledgement of their stake in Afghanistan's future specifically, wanting a stable, non-hostile government there that doesn't challenge the Durand Line, that disputed border.
And this all connects back to that fear of being abandoned again. Right,
Okay.
like after the Soviets left Afghanistan in '89.
Precisely. The report says Pakistan fears a repeat of that, which left them dealing with severe internal problems. They were actually advocating for something like a regional Marshall Plan for state building, not just in Afghanistan, but for Pakistan itself too.
Okay, let's pivot now. Let's talk about India. The report frames India as potentially a long-term counterterrorism partner for the U.S., but their history with the U.S. was also pretty rocky, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely turbulent, often marked by different threat perceptions, Cold War issues like India's non-alignment policy, and flashpoints like U.S. support for Pakistan during the 1971 war.
And India's own nuclear program caused friction.
Big time. India's 1974 peaceful nuclear explosion, or PNE, led directly to U.S. non-proliferation efforts and sanctions targeting India. Strained things considerably.
But then, interestingly, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in '79 actually created an opening for some warming of ties.
It did, ironically. It led to initiatives like the Science and Technology Initiative, STI, in '82, and a 1984 Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, focused on sensitive technologies. A slight thaw.
And after the Cold War,
India's economic reforms in the early 90s, plus the Soviet Union's decline, opened up new opportunities. You had the Kick-Later proposals in '91 and the Agreed Minute on Defense Relations in '95, which started structuring military ties more formally, things like the Defense Policy Group, DPG, Executive Steering Groups, ESGs, Joint Technical Group, JTG.
so the relationship was moving forward, but the report points out a difference in goals again.
Yeah, an interesting asymmetry. The U.S. was generally prioritizing broader strategic cooperation, while India, according to the report, was often more focused on getting access to specific technologies through these engagements, different metrics for success.
And just as things seem to be progressing, boom, India's 1998 nuclear tests, Pokhran the second.
Right. Brought an abrupt halt to ties again, triggered new sanctions. But paradoxically, the report argues, this also led to much more intensive strategic dialogue between the two countries. And eventually, the U.S. quietly had to abandon its old cap, rollback, and eliminate policy regarding South Asian nuclear programs.
It forced a change in U.S. policy.
It did. Then you had the Kargil conflict in '99, where the U.S. largely sided with India's position, and Musharraf's coup later that year. Both events pushed Washington further away from Islamabad, making the U.S. stance seem quite pro-Indian at that moment.
Which culminated in President Clinton's 2000 visit.
Exactly. That visit and the vision statement that came out of it really signaled a qualitatively new phase in the relationship. It established the U.S.-India Joint Working Group on Terrorism, and the subsequent Bush administration built on that, intensifying the military-to-military aspects.
So post 9/11, India made this big offer of support.
An unprecedented offer, actually, unlimited support, including access to specific air bases. But the U.S. ultimately couldn't accept it, primarily because of the conditions Pakistan had set for its own participation. Pakistan's geography was just too crucial for the initial phases of OEF in Afghanistan.
So India's contribution ended up being more indirect.
Largely indirect, yes. Logistical and intelligence support, driven by its own strategic interests, rather than direct participation in OEF itself.
But that joint working group on terrorism and law enforcement was a key channel.
Absolutely key. Formalized in 2000, met 5 times by the time of the report. They focused on sharing info on terrorist financing, providing anti-terrorism training, looking at border management tech, forensic cooperation.
And the report highlights something unique there.
Yes, a joint initiative on cyber terrorism. The report explicitly states the U.S. had no similar relationship with any other country at that time, leveraging India's strengths in IT and shared concerns about cyber threats.
Diplomatically, India sounds like a strong supporter of international efforts.
Very much so. A stalwart supporter of UN counterterrorism conventions, pushing hard for a comprehensive global treaty against terrorism. They also had numerous bilateral working groups and treaties with other countries focused on counterterrorism, extradition, and legal assistance.
And domestically, they took action too.
They passed the Prevention of Terrorism Ordinance, POTO, in 2001. It defined terrorist acts, banned specific organizations, made fundraising for them a crime.
But POTO faced criticism.
Yes, critics pointed to its potentially draconian nature, concerns about weak evidentiary standards, and again, the lack of forensic lab capacity, which hampered effective prosecution. But India has been an active Interpol member since 1946.
Okay, so when we look at threat perceptions between India and the U.S., the report suggests more alignment than with Pakistan. Some convergence.
Quite a bit of convergence, actually, both described as non-revolutionary status quo states. Both tend to work through multilateral institutions, both pluralist democracies. The report mentions the Indian-American community as a kind of bridge factor.
Shared values, shared approaches.
And a shared understanding of new threats being, nebulous, multifaceted. Both have strong interests in stability in the Asia-Pacific, energy security, broadly similar worldviews.
But there's still a major point of divergence.
Yes, the big one. Pakistan. Specifically, what India sees as Pakistan's continued provision of material support for militancy in Kashmir. That's the core disagreement.
India was frustrated that infiltration from Pakistan into Kashmir was still happening, despite Musharraf's promises.
Deeply frustrated. They pointed to election-related violence in Jammu and Kashmir in 2002 as proof positive that it hadn't stopped. India frequently accused Pakistan of being the epicenter of terrorism, the next Afghanistan, churning out militants.
So this shapes India's view of the U.S. strategy.
Completely. The report indicates India saw the U.S. approach as a narrow pursuit of its own security interests, focusing only on the groups with global reach, like al-Qaeda and the Taliban, while basically tolerating Pakistan's proxy war in Kashmir as the price for keeping Musharraf stable and cooperative on al-Qaeda.
They feared a two-stage approach, where the second stage, dealing with Pakistan's militant infrastructure overall, might just never happen.
Exactly that concern, that the U.S. would get what it needed regarding al-Qaeda and then lose interest in the Kashmir focus groups.
So, given this context, what does India want from its cooperation with the U.S.? What are its goals?
First and foremost, according to the report, recognition. Recognition as a global power and as the preeminent power in South Asia.
Status recognition.
Yes, and being brought into the loop on major U.S. policy decisions affecting its neighborhood Central Asia, changes to missile defense treaties like the ABM Treaty. They wanted a seat at the table.
And the UN Security Council seat.
That's a big one symbolically, a permanent seat on the UNSC as the ultimate recognition of that status. But as the report subtly asks, while it's symbolically huge for India, what are the challenges for the U.S. in actually backing that? Given proliferation history, potential opposition from other permanent members, it's tricky.
What about military goals?
Military power projection. They were looking for training, advanced equipment, technical expertise from the U.S. to help modernize their forces, develop capabilities like a blue water navy.
And they want the U.S. to see terrorism through their lens.
Essentially, yes. Acceptance of their perspective on terrorism, particularly Pakistan's role validating their cross-border terrorism narrative.
And their role in Central Asia.
They want their interests, their equities in Central Asia considered. They were actively contributing to Afghanistan's rebuilding, training medical staff, teachers, journalists, and offering their own expertise in managing multi-ethnic armed forces, something they have experience with.
Okay, so we've looked at both relationships, the complexities. Now let's focus directly on Kashmir. The report calls it the hyphen in U.S.-India-Pakistan relations, the constant impediment.
It really is central, and the report does a good job laying out Pakistan's arguments, trying to deflect accusations about supporting terrorism there.
What kind of arguments?
Things like claiming they only provide diplomatic and moral support, trying to distinguish the line of control, LOC, the de facto border in Kashmir from an internationally recognized border to justify movement across it, and labeling militants as freedom fighters despite clear evidence of foreign nationals being involved.
It's a framing strategy.
Absolutely. It allows them or allowed them to maintain plausible deniability while still pursuing strategic objectives in Kashmir.
And India's counter.
India points to what it calls undeniable cross-border terrorism, citing specific attacks like the Red Fort attack in 2000, the attack on the Indian Parliament in 2001, incidents happening deep within undisputed Indian territory. They alleged direct Pakistani state support madrasas, army involvement in training, communications.
And there was deep skepticism in New Delhi about Musharraf's promises to stop infiltration.
Pervasive skepticism. Many in India viewed him as the devious mastermind behind the 1999 Kargil conflict, where Pakistani forces crossed the LOC. They simply didn't trust his assurances.
So India grew increasingly frustrated with the U.S. focus on Musharraf.
Very frustrated. They feared the U.S. approach was actually strengthening Musharraf domestically, potentially at the expense of India's own security interests.
And this dynamic, this distrust, it fuels instability.
Constant conventional deterrence instability. The report points to the massive military buildup along the border in 2002 as a prime example, a very tense standoff.
And underlying all this are the desires of the Kashmiri people themselves, which are also complex and divided, right? The report mentions a poll.
Yes, a 2000 AC Nielsen poll cited in the report showed just how divided Kashmiri aspirations were. People in places like Srinagar and Anantnag largely favored independence or much greater autonomy, while people in the Jammu region predominantly wanted to remain with India. There's no single Kashmiri voice, which makes any political solution incredibly difficult.
Absolutely. And then you add nuclear weapons to this volatile mix.
And suddenly, the Kashmir dispute isn't just a regional problem. It has global implications. It becomes a potential nuclear flashpoint.
And the report suggests both India and Pakistan got pretty good at manipulating international, especially U.S. involvement.
Oh, absolutely. It reveals how, during that 2002 military buildup Operation Parakram, India called it New Delhi, calculated that the U.S. presence in Pakistan would actually incentivize Washington to intervene quickly to keep any conflict limited, essentially allowing India to punish Pakistan without things escalating too far.
Using the U.S. presence as a safety net, almost.
In a way. Meanwhile, Pakistan strategically played up the risk of nuclear escalation. They wanted to encourage U.S. intervention too, but more to put pressure on India to back down, and also maybe divert some resources and attention away from Pakistan's commitments on its Afghan border.
Both using the nuclear specter for leverage.
Precisely. We saw similar dynamics during the 1999 Kargil conflict as well, both sides trying to use the fear of escalation to get the international community to intervene on terms favorable to them.
India developed this idea of limited conventional war as a response to Pakistan's proxy tactics under the nuclear umbrella.
Yes, the Kargil conflict was seen by some as an example of that doctrine in practice. But the report notes critics question whether India truly possessed escalation dominance, the ability to control how a conflict escalates without it spiraling out of control into the nuclear realm. It's a dangerous game.
And Pakistan's nuclear stance.
Pakistan officially maintains a first-use policy, unlike India's stated no first-use pledge. They tend to dismiss India's pledge as just cover for potential conventional aggression, and they imply they might use nuclear weapons if their fundamental sovereignty felt threatened.
So calls for international mediation exist, but the report wasn't optimistic.
Calls exist, yes, but the report reflected low optimism for success given the entrenched positions and complexities.
So bringing it all together, the broader challenge for Washington, as the report lays it out, is navigating these relationships with both Islamabad and New Delhi. It presents challenges, but maybe opportunities too.
Huge challenges, potential opportunities. Pakistan is seen as crucial for containing terrorism spreading from the region. But there's also the risk, highlighted back then, that it could become a new Afghanistan if relations soured completely and it turned anti-Western.
It's a fundamental dilemma.
It is. The U.S. has to grapple with the very real terrorist threat that could emerge from Pakistan, which logically points towards needing the permanent dismantling of militant infrastructure there.
Which, ironically, could also improve life and economic prospects in Pakistan and Kashmir itself.
Potentially, yes,
Ooh.
if that transition could be managed.
Now, the report concludes by laying out 5 ideal-type policy options for the U.S. regarding Kashmir, acknowledging, of course, that reality is usually messier. A mix of approaches.
Right. These are theoretical models. Option 1 is basically Maintain the status quo.
Keep doing what they're doing.
Pretty much. Continue trying to build relations with both countries based on what they offer. Stay ambiguous on Kashmir's final status. Keep encouraging Pakistan to stop the militancy and nudge India to give Kashmiris more political space.
The pros and cons.
Well, it avoids making hard choices right now, but the downside is it likely condemns the U.S. to constant crisis management, doesn't really advance long-term stability, and the militancy issue originating from Pakistan continues to undermine broader U.S. goals.
Okay, so option 2. Be more active.
Take an active role in resolving the dispute. This is much bolder. The U.S. would state clearly that the line of control could be renegotiated within limits. Put real pressure on Pakistan, credible threats, but also an attractive rehabilitation package if they comply. Strongly push India to accommodate Kashmiri political aspirations and set up monitoring mechanisms.
Sounds ambitious. Potential upsides.
Huge upsides if it worked. A peaceful border, a rehabilitated Pakistan focusing inward, India freed up to pursue its larger ambitions, actual political space for Kashmiris.
But the report calls it
Chimerical. Hopeful, but likely unrealistic. And if it failed, it could backfire badly, leading to resentment from all sides. High risk, high reward.
Makes sense. Option 3 sounds like the opposite. Complete disengagement.
Just step back entirely from the Indo-Pakistani conflict over Kashmir. Tell both sides, implicitly or explicitly, you can't rely on us to bail you out or intervene. Force them to figure out de-escalation themselves, maybe like the U.S. did in the 1965 war.
Is that feasible?
Attractive in theory, maybe. But the report says it's hard in practice. Other powers might step in to gain influence, like China reportedly did in '65. And it's tough to truly disengage on Kashmir while still pursuing all the other U.S. interests tied up with both countries.
Hard to compartmentalize. Okay, option 4. Side with India.
Explicitly align with New Delhi. Acknowledge that India's long-term interests are probably more aligned with the U.S. Essentially, try to contain Pakistan while significantly expanding the strategic partnership with India.
What are the risks there?
Several. India might actually resent it if it felt its strategic independence was compromised. It might pursue harsher policies in Kashmir if it felt it had a blank check. It would almost certainly exacerbate Pakistan's insecurity, possibly pushing it towards anti-U.S. alliances and fueling more militancy. Plus, executing this is hard, given Pakistan's nuclear weapons and the ongoing need for some counterterrorism cooperation.
A lot of potential blowback. Which leaves option 5. Side with Pakistan.
Yes. Align with Islamabad's position on Kashmir and other security concerns. A Pakistan-first approach aimed at reducing its insecurity. Focus heavily on trying to rehabilitate Pakistan's civilian institutions, its economy, its human capital, but with really rigorous monitoring.
Potential benefit.
Could, theoretically, allow Pakistan to achieve a sense of security, invest resources differently, maybe pave the way for a regional economic normalization eventually.
But the risks.
Big risks here, too. It might embolden the Pakistan military in unproductive ways. It would require incredibly delicate handling with India, who would likely struggle to understand why the U.S. would side with what was then an autocratic regime, potentially sacrificing India's interests.
So looking back at this 2004 analysis, what does it all mean for you, our listener? We've explored this tightrope the U.S. walks balancing vital counterterrorism goals against this incredibly deep-seated rivalry between India and Pakistan.
A dynamic where Kashmir remains this constantly volatile centerpiece. The choices Washington makes, or doesn't make, have direct impacts, not just on regional stability, but on the global fight against terrorism and that ever-present threat of nuclear escalation.
Which leaves us with a final thought to consider. Given the clear challenges of these ideal-type policy options, and the seemingly enduring nature of the Kashmir dispute,
how do you think the international community could most effectively incentivize or even pressure all parties towards a lasting multilateral resolution, especially for a conflict that remains a nuclear flashpoint and a persistent source of global concern? What might be the hidden costs, not just for the region, but for everyone, if the status quo or something like it just continues